I put out a few Twitter polls today, some of you may have seen, and I was trying to gauge basically if these takes are hot enough. And this one, most people disagreed with me by a pretty decent margin, so I'm going to say that it qualifies. I think that Anthony Davis's peak clears Joel Embiid's, and I think that he has a top 25 single season peak in NBA history. I asked who had the higher peak on Twitter. 57.5% of people said Embiid. I disagree. And when we're talking about the single season, that is 2020 for Anthony Davis, when he was, to me, a top 2 player on the planet. He had a great regular season, should have been defensive player of the year over Giannis. He's just a more versatile defensive player, but a significantly more consistent interior anchor. Giannis, very, very good at his job, playing the Roma role, playing free safety, being a pretty destructive helper, but AD is just such an elite full-time rim protector, such a versatile defensive big, such great hands. He's always cleared Giannis defensively, and that was really his season to get it because the Lakers were such a great team defense, and he was first-team All-NBA that year, but it's really about the postseason. It's about the level that we got from Anthony Davis in that title run because it was absolutely absurd. In the playoffs, 28 points, 10 rebounds, 3.5 assists per game on 57% from the field, 38% from three, nearly 67% true shooting. And a huge part of that was that he had a career jump shooting run. 3-point percentage, I already mentioned, very high, especially by his standards, but he was 50% from mid-range and just put on an absolute clinic of skilled shot making, averaged 1.11 points per jumper in the playoffs. And that's absolutely an outlier jump shooting run. There's just no denying that. AD has not come close to replicating that ever since. But when we're talking about single season peak, I mean, we can talk about sustainability. He did it. He did it for the most 21 important games of his career consistently throughout that run. And that version of LeBron James was still the best player in the world to me. And Anthony Davis outplayed him for the first 3 rounds of those playoffs. Marginally so, but it was really just the finals to me where LeBron asserted himself as the best player on that team. And when AD was at that level as a jump shooter, he was so ridiculously versatile offensively, and defensively has always been so versatile. So like he could easily dominate at the 4 or the 5. You see him starting alongside 5s throughout that run. His ability to space the floor was really important to making those viable, effective lineups, and it just empowered him to do everything at a high level. I mean, still so athletic, still such a great vertical spacer and lob threat, 83rd percentile roll man, 75th percentile isolation score, the ball handling, the fluidity, the jump shooting was all coming together so nicely that year. Great in transition. As this agile athletic big for a team that played pretty darn fast. He could spot up because he was shooting the ball so well, and he was a dominant defender in every way, right? Could play every coverage. As I mentioned, one of the great rim protectors that we've seen in this game. Also, those such great hands, playing passing lanes, affecting pocket passes, guarding out in space, so agile. And so when I compare him to Embiid, I do think that Embiid, this current version, which is the best version of Embiid that we've seen, this regular season was ridiculous, and it was his best postseason showing, is better equipped to carry a team as a floor raiser, just because of the volume that he can eat up offensively. But AD's flexibility, his malleability to dominate no matter what, I prefer, because I think when you start putting Embiid alongside other great players, as is required of basically any guy who's trying to win a title, like there are still just some downsides with him. There is the element of ball stopping. There is the reliance on the face-up jumper that has abandoned him oftentimes in the postseason. AD is, to me, clearly a significantly better defensive player. Having that sort of quickness in the playoffs is really valuable, not being slow-footed, so you can't be exploited in space defensively, so you're constantly getting up and down the floor, going both ways in transition. I just think that AD is such a perfect complement to basically any team at the 4 or the 5. And I'm talking about his peak within that season, but when I look at the career of Anthony Davis, I just think it's very underrated. And I think he's pretty darn close to a top 30 player of all time, Logan, because the 2020 season may be an outlier in terms of just the level he was at as a jump shooter and doing it throughout an extended playoff run to win a title. But obviously, New Orleans Pelicans Anthony Davis was an absolute monster, one of the great defensive forces we've seen, while he's averaging an efficient 26 to 28 and 12 year after year. And the version of AD that we've gotten these last 2 years is phenomenal as well. So now he's got the longevity. I mean, he's a 9-time All-Star at this point. So when I think about the top 25 list that we did last year, some of the toughest cuts were David Robinson, Elgin Baylor, Kawhi, Havlicek, Steve Nash, Rick Barry. I think AD's peak probably clears all of those guys except for Kawhi, who I think is pretty soundly above him. But David Robinson is a really interesting comparison, right? Because they are such freak athletes, such dominant defenders. But I think that 2020 AD was pretty clearly a better offensive player than David Robinson ever was, had certainly a better offensive postseason than Robinson ever did. So yeah, I think that the peak is top 25, and I think the overall career body of work, he's really, really solidly at least making him a top 40 player of all time. And people don't talk about AD that way. People love to give their gripes for AD. They love to moan and complain about AD and just focus on the negatives and ignore the insane defensive floor that he gives any team. And the fact that he's so offensively skilled on top of that alone makes him one of the most talented and productive bigs that we've ever seen, and accomplished bigs. I just want to shine more credit on the career that he's had, because it's been an amazing career and he's still going strong.
I completely agree with this take. And it really surprised me on Twitter, because I voted when you posted that one, and I voted for Anthony Davis. I was really surprised at the time I voted. It was like a 20-80 sort of split for Embiid.
Wow.
And frankly, it shocked me. I think Embiid has to have a run like that before we can put him in those conversations. Like, availability is a big concern. And I know, for a while it was every other Davis, but we've seen AD have that run, and we've seen how consistently he's anchored great defenses. And I think you make a lot of cogent arguments, Carson. His malleability alongside other players, his all-around impact, his lack of, you can't expose him. There's no real weakness in AD's game. And I want to ask you this specifically too. I think that is his peak, the 2020 season, when they get the ring, the jump shooting's on a different level.
Yeah.
And I know we only saw him for one round. What did you think about his last playoff run that we saw against Denver, and how that stacks up and how that affects your view of AD?
I mean, it was a phenomenal offensive series, obviously. I do think it was a step down defensively, a pretty clear step down from what we saw in 2023, which was, I would argue, even a better defensive run than the bubble, at least up until that Nuggets series. What he did to the Grizzlies and the Warriors was one of the most dominant defensive showings ever. But yeah, I mean, the skilled shot making was on bubble level in this series against the Nuggets. The difference is that he was defending significantly better in the bubble, and he sustained that jump shooting for 21 games. And he was still, to me, a better lob threat, a better vertical athlete, pick and roll finisher at that stage. Although I think he's gotten a little bit better as a post-up player, as he's gotten a little bit stronger over the years, a little bit bigger. But that was just the most complete version of AD that we've seen. So I saw a fair share of people saying, if we're talking multi-year peak, Embiid clears, but if we're just talking bubble, I mean, that AD was something different. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I do think that, 2020 AD is clear of anything that we've seen from Embiid. Embiid is a special floor raiser, but when it comes to scaling, when it comes to doing all the complementary things and still being a high usage, crazy high efficiency scorer, AD is just in all-time company there in that 2020 season.
I think even multi-year, I might still take AD, man. I'm not the biggest Joel Embiid fan, so I'm obviously not going to be the guy that's going to make the argument. But because I do think Embiid still has his real flaws, right? The reliance on the jumper, the stagnation of the offense. But yeah, I just think AD does so many things at such a high level, man, and he's got a rare skill set that is really hard to find, man. What he can do defensively is just so special.
Yeah, and the jump shot point is a little bit tricky because it's obviously over the course of their careers. Embiid is a significantly better jump shooter than Anthony Davis. It's just AD was out of his mind in that one run, and Embiid has often really, really dropped off as a jump shooter when it's mattered most. I just want to add one more stat here. There's one player ever who has scored at least 25 points per game in a postseason on 65% true shooting in a title run. That is 2020 Anthony Davis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, man. With the defensive impact he's giving you, that's a ridiculous stat.
Yeah. There you go. That's my final AD stat. Absolute different beast that year.
All right. I got some playoff numbers.
Wait. I lied.
Wait.
Steph and KD are also in that club.
Good company.
Good company. I set the minimum to 20 games, and then I realized, the Dubs were putting people away a little bit quicker than that even. But crazy club.
It is a crazy club.
And you know what? Let's just reinvent the stat. The only guy to ever average 25 and 9 on 65% true shooting in a title run is Anthony Davis in 2020.